Hi, afternoon everyone. I feel like I've got a difficult gig here, not just because of the content this morning, but the copious amounts of sea bass and couscous and chicken that's going through everyone's systems now. So I'll try and keep this energy levels high, so keep with me, okay? I've only got 20 minutes. So I'm the commercial director at read.co.uk. I'm sure a lot of you know who read.co.uk are, but we're essentially a marketplace where job seekers can find their next job and recruiters can find their next hire. So we do a number of pieces of research throughout the course of the year on different topics, and the aim of that is twofold. One is to educate us as an organisation about the sort of challenges that our customers who are recruiting face. It's also so we can come along to events like this and share some of our findings with you. So I guess, as an organisation, we're trying to improve lives through work. So hopefully some of the things that we'll talk to you about today will help you recruit people more effectively, and really challenge the way that you do things. What I would say I've been really pleased about, which is sort of a few moment here, is that this morning's content is largely aligned with everything I'm going to talk about. So I don't have to do any sort of awkward undoing of a lot of the messages from this morning. So fingers crossed, everything will align with some of the stuff that we talked about. But what I really want to do as well is challenge our perceptions of young people throughout the course of this. So I'm not, definitely not Gen Z. I'm not a millennial, I'm just outside that. But what we're going to talk about is some research we did with younger users. So back end of 2019, we did some research with about 2,000, not job seekers on read.co.uk, 2,000 people who are out there in the market between the ages of 18 to 24. So what we wanted to find out about was their experiences, their perceptions of life at work. What are the things that they look forward to? What are the things that they are nervous about? And really, what this is really trying to do is sometimes get us, as we recruit a lot of people in that age group at read.co.uk, and hopefully you guys, to think about the ways which we portray our businesses to a younger audience and the ways that we can maybe recruit more effectively in future. So there's a few areas here. Route into work, that's not about whether they get a bus or the tube. This is about kind of why they go into the world of work, which is their desired route. We're going to talk a little about, from a job seeker's perspective, the things that go through their heads when they're starting their career. A little bit about the employers that they're interested in and what engages them from the perspective of an employer. We'll also talk a little bit about company culture. Zach talked earlier on today about culture. So some of the things that we'll talk about here, we're going to build on some of those themes. And this really interesting thing about confidence. We have a perception of younger people as being sort of uber confident in this social media world. I'm going to challenge that a little bit here. Okay, so where should we start? So we'll start with people's route into work. So this is really about how do job seekers make the decision about how they enter the world of work. So from the respondents, those 2,000, so 36% of that 18 to 24 demographic that we spoke to are currently working. So they're outside in, education and they are working full-time. The next biggest cohort was studying at university. So we had a lot of people in this survey who are currently doing a typically 3-year course at university. So they may be starting to think about what a step into the world of work might look like. We then had people applying to study, so these are people potentially at college. So they might be working part-time, they might have weekend jobs, but these are not yet in full-time employment at a university, or certainly not in full-time employment in the world of work. The next are looking for work. So these are people who are actively looking for a new job, so they're looking for a first step on the career ladder. And 5% are actually on apprenticeships, which actually was actually quite low, so it might be a quirk of our of this presentation, it might be a quirk of the audience, but only 5% of the people that we spoke to were currently on an apprenticeship scheme at the moment. So that might talk to the availability of apprenticeships, and maybe we need to be better at talking about the opportunities that apprenticeships have. So, of those people who are studying at university, so 55% of these people believe that studying at university is worth the debt. So we talked earlier on about this point around elitism, and we talked about the fact that university is an incredibly expensive place to be. But 55% of these people believe that going into university, particularly if they're looking at a career path which is professional or very vocational, that taking on that debt will pay them back in the long term. It is worth doing. Overarching comment here was that having a degree does give you a leg up into the world of work. So that's particularly, obviously, people who are going to work in medicine or law or other accountancy, other market sectors like that where typically a qualification is necessary. But I think also there was a cohort here who felt that they probably should go to university, not necessarily because the job that they come out of university with demands a degree or demands a qualification, but they think they are more likely to have better long-term career prospects if they go to university. So that's quite an interesting one. So there's a belief that going to university and taking on this debt will serve them better in the long run. We also had the cohort of people who have come out of university, the other side, and who have studied. So 51% of the people who have the benefit of hindsight and retrospect actually said that university doesn't prepare you for the working world. So actually, does that mean that they, in retrospect, think that going to university and giving themselves that burden of debt was worthwhile? And really interestingly, we asked people why they went to university. And actually, 26% said they just went to university because they didn't really know what to do. It seemed like the obvious thing to do when they left college. And about a fifth of the people that we surveyed basically said that we went to university because our parents told us to. So a big cohort, I don't know what to do. And a lot of those people were told, well, you obviously go to university, don't you? So I think it's really interesting that we see this big group of people that are going to university kind of on a whim because they think it's the right thing to do without necessarily having clarity of what they're trying to get out of it. But this 51% of people did think that a degree is less valuable today than it used to be, which I think start talking about the difficulty that people have when they come out of university and the fact that it no longer guarantees you a job when you leave. So the people who did go straight to work highlighted a few things. So first is the ability to earn. That was the thing that kind of came out as being the most important reason why people just left college, left school, and went straight into work. There was also the fact that a lot of people said that they wanted to be free of the burden of student debt. People said, you know, we're not academic, I'm just not interested in further education. And then I couldn't afford the tuition fees. So I guess there's quite a few things here, for me anyway. But I think two of the really interesting points to align to our presentation this morning from Prospects is this point 2 and 4. There's a real alignment here between the challenges that people have when they come out of university, or the perceived challenges of coming out of university with probably a minimum of £30,000 worth of debt. So people who are going into university are either saying, I can afford that, I have access to financial resources that are going to help me, or I am prepared to take on a pretty long-term burden of a particularly large amount of money, which I'm going to have to pay off over time. So I think it's really important for us to understand that actually people come out of university as a result of these sorts of fears, with a lot of debt and a lot of concern hanging over them. But again, the main reason why this cohort didn't go to university was because they wanted to earn, and really they didn't want to be burdened or weighed down with debt after they left. Really interestingly, again, another benefit of hindsight. So 20% of the people who did go straight into work felt that it wasn't the best route. So they've taken the decision not to go to university, but they've actually then thought, do you know what, maybe going straight into employment wasn't the right thing to do. And what came out here was an overarching feeling of the fact that they didn't necessarily have all of the information that they needed before they made that decision. So, as an example, career services came up earlier on, and potentially not enormously positively here. So one of the things that people talked about was the fact that I wasn't given great information when I was at college in sixth form to really tell me about why going to university would, in the long term, be beneficial for me. So what they actually felt was that, well, if no one's going to tell me that going to university is beneficial, I'm just going to go into work. And again, the financial point comes out here. If people had more access to finances, if they felt that they could more readily pay stuff back when they left university, they might have taken a different route. But again, we've got a retrospect previously, or hindsight rather previously, from people who have gone to university and said maybe it wasn't worth it. We've also got 20% of people who say they wish they had. So really interesting here about how maybe we can work better with career services to make people understand the benefit of further education. Those who are on apprenticeships. So again, you remember this is a relatively small cohort, but about half of those people said the opportunity to earn and learn was important. So they can take on less financial burden, they can earn as they go, but also we know that one of the benefits of an apprenticeship is the fact that you get these qualifications while you're in the world of work. And actually, it might set you up better to understand what a working culture looks like. So apprenticeships, they felt, were the best way of starting their career. Okay, so that's kind of their route. That's why they decided to do what they decided to do. So What we're now going to think about is the feelings that are evoked by the idea of moving into work. And ultimately, the words I'm going to put on the screen, I think, highlight the fact that going from education, whether that's be university or whether that's going straight from school, is daunting, it's uncomfortable, it can be unwelcoming, it can be overwhelming. Because ultimately what they've said to us, it's tough. It is tough. So that's how they feel. They feel that going from education into work is difficult. It's not something which is easy. But I think what it does say is there's an element of realism here. So these people understand that working is difficult. They understand that people have to knuckle down. They're not expecting it to be this kind of glorious thing whereby there are unicorns and all these other things floating about. They're actually expecting work to be difficult, and they're going to have to work quite hard. But for me, this isn't a positive, necessarily, way of thinking about employment. So this might be why some people continue in university, because maybe there's a comfort about university, whereas there's a sort of daunting, overwhelming view of work. But interestingly enough, 73% of those respondents believe that starting a career today is harder than it was for their parents. And I think there's a few reasons for that. Obviously, we talked about some of the debt that comes with you, so maybe if you're starting a career and you've got a huge amount of debt, that might be a challenge. But also, I think this is around the employment market. Very high employment, very low unemployment. It's difficult to get a job. Certainly your dream job becomes quite difficult in a market whereby there are less job opportunities out there. But I think also something that came out was potentially the word career. So maybe this is also talking about the fact that a job and a career might be two distinct things from one another. People might think, okay, well, I need to get into work in order to get experience, in order to get that first step on the ladder, in order to kind of get through the door. But I think here it's really around the fact that it just solidifies this idea that this isn't a glorious, positive, necessarily experience. It's something that actually us as people who recruit a lot of people in this younger age bracket need to make jobs welcoming and comforting for people to a degree. 2/3 of people, unsurprisingly, were concerned about the current economic climate. So not just about costs of things, but also security. So does this mean that actually when we're talking to a younger age group, we need to be more mindful of the fact that job security and stability are things which they are concerned about? So they are more forward-thinking than potentially we give them credit for. Another thing which they've said is that their first thoughts about their first step is menial work. So this isn't manual work, this is menial work. But largely what people were saying was that we expect to do things which won't necessarily be enormously fulfilling in the first instance. But we do understand that in our first step on the career ladder, we're going to have to do hard jobs which aren't particularly glamorous, but actually it's an important part of what we understand a career path to look like. So again, this doesn't scream of the language that people think, I'm going to go to university and do a degree and take on loads of debt. But again, there is a level of realism and pragmatism that this group have said that they do expect to have to do menial work, in inverted commas, when they come out of university or come out of college into the working world for the first time. So they believe, 59% believe that they'll undertake menial work before landing their desirable or their most desired job. So again, people understand that you have to kind of get experience before you can get experience in there, if that makes sense. There's also the feeling about low pay. So a couple of years ago, I presented at one of the IHR events, actually, and we were looking at a younger cohort and what they expected. And actually, really interestingly, their salary expectations in this survey have dropped quite a lot from when we did this a similar presentation a couple of years ago. So this cohort said they expected to start on a salary somewhere between £15,000 and £25,000. And this is both people who are doing a degree, or recently graduated. So they're not necessarily pie in the sky and expecting to earn millions straight away. There is a level of, again, realism about what they can expect. But I think this does talk about that menial work point relatively early on. Obviously, there will be geographical differences here. But I think for me, it's interesting. When we did asked this question a few years ago, the number at the top there was well over £30,000. So maybe expectations have changed in the last couple of years. Okay, so now let's talk a bit about employers. So we asked them what was important about the employers that they were looking for. And the first thing they said was vital to them was good relationships with colleagues. So at read.co.uk, when we do our internal surveys, the thing that always comes out first is the reason why people enjoy coming to work is the people that they work with. And I think this very clearly articulates that this group of people are collegiate. They want to work with other people. They want to collaborate. They don't necessarily want to work in a silo. They do want to work with other people. I think for me this is a really interesting one. Again, going back to what we talked about, if they think that work's going to be difficult, that they're going to be not paid a huge amount, actually they want it to be a good place to be, and they want to work with people that they can get on with and they can socialise with. And again, I think this is a really interesting one about how we as employers can create communities within our organisations to make people feel welcome. They also said that they wanted a clear, defined career path. And again, we talked about this a little bit in one of the presentations this morning. But this talks about the fact that when someone starts and they're trying to forge a career, they do want to have an understanding of where their career can take them, what's next. And it's not just when's my next promotion, it's what training am I going to get? It's where are my opportunities for progression, whether that's sideways, whether it's moving into different roles, different departments. But I think for me this was a really interesting one because it does talk about the fact that even if people are going into a, inverted commas, menial work at the beginning, they want to understand what can come next. And they probably want to know what they need to be able to do and to be able to demonstrate in order to move into that next role. And we had feedback like this from a lot of people on our sales team that we've recruited over the years who have joined, and in their first couple of years, maybe we didn't give them the structured learning and progress that we wanted to. So we reacted and we created something called the Sales Academy at read.co.uk. And actually what that's done, it's literally a career path. It shows in your first 2 years, these are the learning and development interventions. This is where you can, if you perform, you can be up for promotions. And this is what you get when you graduate. So we're using that very specific language around pathways and graduation to make people in those kind of early 2 years with us as a business think, I know where I'm headed. And actually they can then challenge us to make sure that we follow through with that, but obviously we can also make sure that we're understanding with them of how they're getting on against those kind of 2-year expectations. And for us, that's done a really good things in terms of attraction and retention. So throwing this out there as an idea, there's something people might want to think about. And lastly, benefits. Lots of these presentations and lots of events that we go to, we talk about benefits. We were actually talking on our table earlier on about benefits. But I think here, again, going through the details on some of the detail on the presentation, this isn't necessarily about pensions or more annual leave. This is actually a lot about perks. It's around the other things in your working life that can make it interesting and enjoyable, whether that's flexible working, whether it's not necessarily ping pong tables, but other things that are there which actually can take you away from the sort of the day-to-day job and actually make it a more inclusive and enjoyable place to be. Okay, then we talked a little bit about company culture. So what do they look for in a culture? So really interestingly, they said that they will know if they're a right fit for that business. 49% said based on the atmosphere at an interview. So I guess really quickly, it's important for us to understand that their perception of our business and therefore whether they fit in starts essentially when they walk through reception to go through for an interview, or whether they receive that video interview, how we engage them and infuse them and welcome them into that environment. So people, if you're in the consumer world, there's been lots of research done about the impact that a good or a bad interview and onboarding experience can have on that organisation's bottom line. I think that talks about that. It talks about people expect amazing experiences, people expect to be welcome, so we should all try and do that. The company website. So make sure your company website talks about what it's like to be there, some of the stuff that Zach talked about. Show pictures of people. Talk about stories about what it's like to be there. And actually, if you've got a purpose which you want people to buy into, talk about it. Don't make it the first time that someone starts understanding about what your business is about, what it means to be part of your team when they walk in the door on their first day. That should be part of something they can get from your website and understand what you guys are about. Online reviews. So what does Glassdoor say about you? What do people say about your CEO? In the research, it talks a lot about the power of information about your CEO. What are they like as someone to work for? But I think really critically, if someone puts a Glassdoor review about you on Glassdoor, even if it's a bad one, respond to it. Show empathy, show understanding, reach out to that person and try and resolve it. Because that's exactly the sort of thing that this group that we surveyed said they were looking out for. Do they care about the experience that people get? Really, really important. Tone of voice, again, replicating from this morning, but they will know if they fit based on the tone of voice. So not just the persona and the personality, but kind of how that brand is portrayed. Does your brand represent your personality? Does it represent your people? Is it something that I can engage in and it will resonate with me? Word of mouth, again. So really interesting. So just similar to with the reviews, this younger generation are more likely to crowdsource information than any others. So they won't just look on Glassdoor. They will try and understand what it's like to work there. And I think one of the things that we've seen as a business is the power of the referral. If you're being referred by someone and you trust that person, you'd hope they're telling you they're referring you to a good organisation. But I think it's a really important piece here to understand that family are important. So word of mouth, whether your family recommends a business, is important. But that index is much higher for a slightly older generation. This 18 to 24 are interested in almost like, masses of data. What does the world at large think about the place I'm going to go and work for? And finally, social. What does your organisation's Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram page say about you? Let's make sure that tone of voice and personality are consistent. Okay, so ultimately what we asked them, as I said, was this kind of what does company culture mean? They said, we want a culture, or culture means how we work with one another. Are we collaborative or not? Do we have people in our organisation that are ambitious and are going to drive us and the rest of the business forward? And do they offer flexible working? And again, this isn't just, can I come in a little bit late and leave a little bit early? This is about that balance between work and life. This is around the fact that work consumes a big part of what you do, so how can we make this as comfortable for people and actually understand that kind of work and life can coexist? Okay, so confidence is one of the final things that we'll talk about. So we have this view that this younger age group are super confident. They're used to being on, having Instagram pictures, and they're used to using all of these social media assets, which basically are about putting themselves out there. But very few people take a picture of themselves and post it straight away. They probably take 10 pictures and then pick the one which is best and then put a filter on it. So they're not as confident necessarily as that we think they are. So I think what's really interesting here is about how people feel when they come into the world of work. And 47% of these respondents basically said that they have imposter syndrome. They start a job and they think, am I going to be able to do this? Why am I here? Am I deserving of this? Am I going to be successful? Am I going to be found out? So for me, and certainly from the information that we've seen from people, this is really about how can we make sure that they have the tools to do their job effectively? Can we try and work with them to take away this sense of imposter syndrome and actually just think, rather than just the fact that you're here and you're going to be successful because you've got all the tools at your disposal. So we asked them also, how can they feel confident? So they said, we want feedback from colleagues. We want people around us to tell us how we're doing. We want to understand whether we're a good part of the team and whether we're doing a good job. We also want regular training. So we want to understand if I have skills gaps, how are you going to help me fill those? What are you going to give me as an organisation to make sure that I can develop my skills to be more effective in future? We also want feedback from a senior team. So this isn't just peer-to-peer. They want top-down feedback from their line managers, for example, about how they're getting on. Because your peers will probably talk to you about certain things that you're good at, but a more senior person within the organisation, your manager, might talk to you about something different. So actually, if you can have a much more holistic view about your gaps and where you can develop, this is something that this cohort said was really important to them. And really interestingly, they also talked about counselling. So one of the things which people talked about was the fact that another way of me getting more confident was actually to have counselling outside work. So I think whether this is an indication of the fact that well-being is becoming a much bigger part of the vernacular, a much bigger part of the conversation, maybe that's what it's saying here. But essentially what they're screaming out for is they're screaming out for feedback, they're screaming out for development, and what they're all screaming out for is help. If I'm struggling, I want someone to help me, both in the organisation, but also access to this outside. I know a lot of organisations probably in this room have access to confidential helplines, referrals to other organisations if people are struggling. I think that becomes a really important part of this because probably this generation, they're probably more aware of their mental health probably than any generation before. So I hope that's given you a few insights into what this group thought. So in summary, university is still the go-to, but actually probably less so than before. Job seekers have low expectations, so they don't expect to be paid a lot, they expect to do menial work, and they expect work to be tough. But how can we make sure that we give them an amazing experience and challenge those expectations? Can we lift it up so people are more positive when they come into a new workplace? They said that building positive relationships in an organisation and creating communities was important to them. They also said that the perception of culture starts in the application process. Let's respond to people when we say we're going to respond to them. Let's give them feedback. Just because you've got 20 applications sitting in the inbox doesn't necessarily mean that we can't get back to someone, even if it's a, sorry, you've been unsuccessful. And finally, people do have imposter syndrome. They're not as confident as we maybe think. So let's help them out. Thanks very much.